Our protagonist looks at this guy, hesitant but determined, as if weighing a question she'd been holding back for too long. He sighed, already sensing where this was going. She brought it up anyway, boldly but with a hint of nervousness, as if testing the waters. He raised an eyebrow, clearly not impressed. There was a pause. Then she said it. She wanted to take the next step with him. No filters, no walls, just the two of them, like she'd imagined more than once. He stared at her, surprised not just by the words, but by how open she was being. She thought to herself, I wanted this with him, not just something soft and safe, but real and intense. I wanted to be the one who changed the rules. She looked into his eyes and asked again, softer this time. Did he still feel the same way about keeping boundaries? She noticed the tension in his eyes and asked gently if he was nervous. He tried to brush it off with a joke, mentioning how the rain would probably last all day, just like his restless thoughts. But when she reached out to him again, his voice dropped, questioning her intentions. Despite the hesitation, he closed the space between them. Her breath caught, soft and sincere, as she told him how she felt. He paused, almost in disbelief, and asked her to say it again. And when she did, the words came out even more certain than before. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. He asked if they could really live like this, together, just the two of them. She smiled, eyes steady, and said yes, but only if he promised to look at no one else but her. A man sat hunched over his computer, a cigarette dangling between his fingers as the screen glowed against the dark. With a sigh, he shut the laptop, stubbed out the cigarette like it had personally offended him, and walked to the door. When he opened it, Jane stood there, looking like sleep had filed a formal complaint and walked out on her. He raised an eyebrow, half amused. She admitted it. Sleep wouldn't come, and it might have been his fault. He just chuckled and motioned her in, already heading toward the kitchen, like this was their usual late-night routine. Milk therapy, coming right up. But she grabbed his arm gently, stopping him. She didn't want him to leave her side. He paused, then gave her a soft look. Sometimes warm milk could wait. They sat together in the quiet room, shadows stretching across the walls. She smiled and suggested they play there, just the two of them. He gave a tired smirk, already knowing her routine, showing up like clockwork every night, like insomnia had a schedule. She asked why he thought she came, her voice light but curious. He glanced at the dark room around them and shrugged. The darkness didn't scare him, but the not knowing, that unsettled him. He never liked things he couldn't see clearly, literally or otherwise. She tilted her head, her tone softening. It was the first time he really opened up to her. He rolled his eyes with a faint grin, correcting her. He hadn't opened any doors. She just barged her way in, no warning, no knocking, like a storm with good intentions. She insisted it was the same thing, barging in or being let in. Either way, she got there. He scoffed, not convinced, but she doubled down with all the stubborn energy of someone who had no plans of losing the argument. She accused him of liking the feeling of winning against her every single day. He didn't deny it outright, just shrugged as if the thrill of victory wasn't worth much when it came to her. Then came the kiss, quiet, unplanned, but heavy with questions she hadn't voiced until now. She pulled back, wondering aloud why he never pushed her away. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he thought it would end badly, for her. But that didn't stop her from asking the one thing she hadn't until now. His name, he only gave her a sly look, telling her to stick with what she'd always called him. Just, hey, you. It was easier that way, less room for trouble. She pouted, insisting she didn't want to keep calling him that. She wanted to know his real name, properly, with some dignity, and for the record, she never said, hey, you, in the first place. Or at least not that often, maybe once. Okay, a few times. He raised a brow, teasing her as if her memory were a little too convenient. As she stammered to defend herself, he leaned in, close enough to make the space between them disappear. With a low voice and a smirk, he whispered something that made her heartbeat skip. Even without knowing everything, he said, there were still things they could do, just like this. She didn't argue. Instead, her voice softened, honest and unsure. There were moments, quiet ones, when she'd really wondered. About him, about them. Maybe more than she ever wanted to admit. A voice from outside echoed through the door, asking if the bodyguard was in his room. Then, with some frustration, it added, "Isn't he inside? Did the two of them go out together? Where could they have gone at this late hour?" She groaned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. He glanced at her with a smirk, quietly commenting, "I think they're looking for us." It wasn't the first time, and it hadn't been that long either. He introduced himself with a smile. "Nice to meet you. I'm Yoon Changjo." She couldn't help but think back to their first meeting, remembering the impression he'd left on her. The lady glanced at Jane, raising an eyebrow. "You're here? You're a bit late." Jane explained she had been busy preparing for an exhibition coming up next month. "Didn't you say you were leaving for the art center?" the lady asked, teasing. "But when you say it like that, it sounds like you're working seriously." Jane scoffed, saying of course she was doing it for real. What did they think? She was just lounging around. The lady smirked, not entirely convinced, and mentioned Jane's sister, the director. Had she given Jane any hints or pointers? Jane replied that her sister had made sure there were no obstacles in her way, polished the road so smooth even a marble would roll straight. The lady's attention shifted suddenly. She squinted toward the entrance. "Who's that over there?" "Is that your brother?" Jane looked confused for a second. "My brother?" The woman nodded, pointing. "Looks like Park Junseop is stopping by. Isn't he your brother?" Someone nearby mumbled that it might be their first time meeting, but even they didn't sound too sure. Jane raised a brow, clearly unimpressed. Calling over strangers without checking first? Bold move. She let out a short laugh, asking when anyone around here had ever bothered to ask before doing anything anyway. Just then, a man stepped closer, his voice loud and dramatic. He asked if that wasn't her brother, then squinted and grinned as recognition hit. It was Jane, Hong Jane, in the flesh. He threw in an exaggerated bow, joking about how honored he was that the youngest princess herself, Daham, had come to bless such a modest place. The room immediately filled with secondhand embarrassment. She scrunched her nose and muttered to her partner, clearly annoyed. The woman across the room was already drunk, slurring, swaying, and one bad decision away from karaoke. What a mess. He waved her over with an eager grin, claiming he'd already gotten her a gift. Jane rolled her eyes and told him to keep his hands to himself. He quickly raised them in surrender, a sheepish smile spreading across his face as he apologized, realizing he'd forgotten how much she hated that sort of thing. Just a momentary lapse. Clearly his memory had taken the day off. As he fumbled through his apology, Jane's mind drifted. The director's words echoed back to her from earlier that day. "PM's second son came back yesterday. Go over and show your face. That innocent act of yours won't work anymore." Great. Just what she needed. Another reunion, wrapped in awkward history. She took a seat, and he plopped down right next to her, handing over a gift bag like it was some kind of treasure. He proudly mentioned it was wine, something she liked, and claimed it had been tough to get. She accepted it with a polite smile and a casual thanks, adding that she'd enjoy it. But as she peeked at the label, her thoughts betrayed her face. This isn't hard to find. But okay, go ahead and brag like you climbed a mountain for it. Without ceremony, she poured herself a glass and downed it in one go, while he clapped like she'd just won a gold medal in drinking. He nodded toward the girl who had spoken earlier, then gestured at the couple sitting across from them. With a grin, he dropped the news. They were getting married. Then he turned to Jane, pointing out how she'd been skipping these gatherings for a while, clearly missing out on all the juicy updates. Jane looked mildly amused, arching a brow. Married? Really? Then he turned the spotlight on her, asking if she was next. To his surprise, she blinked, caught off guard. Married? Her? He nodded again, this time with extra enthusiasm, mentioning something about the son of the vice president of Baeksan Energy. Jane nearly choked on her drink. What? I've never even met the guy. Jane leaned back slightly, swirling her glass as she thought to herself, Hong Chairman's reputation really was something else. People even said he looked noble while horseback riding. Whatever that meant. But then the man beside her shifted the mood with one question, tossed out way too casually. If she were to get married, who would take the seat of honor? Her birth mother? Or her legal mother? The room went dead quiet. Even the clinking of glasses seemed to hold its breath. He scanned the room, clearly expecting backup, but got only awkward silence. Jane, unfazed, took a long sip, then set her glass down with a soft clink. With a sly smile, she dropped a response sharp enough to slice the tension, tossing in a jab that was equal parts joke and challenge. A few half-laughs followed, but no one rushed to add more. Her tone had already done enough heavy lifting. He leaned in with a grin, acting like he was just asking out of harmless curiosity. Another question, just one more, clearly fishing for gossip no one wanted to answer. Jane's patience thinned fast. The topic was already touchy, and now he was treating it like some soap opera plot twist. She gave a tight smile, her voice edged with irritation. The man blinked, finally catching on that he'd poked too hard. He backpedaled, laughing nervously, tossing out an apology laced with the usual excuse, too much to drink, talking nonsense. Classic. She stood up, grabbing her bag with a sharp motion. Her words cut through the room, her frustration unmistakable. Junseop, though, had no defense this time. With a sarcastic chuckle, she shot him a look, her tone biting. She laid out the accusations, one after the other, pointing out all the ways he'd manipulated situations to his advantage, whether it was with stocks, shifting blame to others, or his shady dealings. Finally, she threw in a jab, comparing herself to the illegitimate child. At least that person had more morals, right? The room fell into an awkward silence. It wasn't just the words, but the cold, precise delivery that made it hit home. He slammed his hand on the table, visibly frustrated. "Damn it, Jane, I'm getting pissed off!" "Do I really have to hear all this from you? Who wants to live as a second-class citizen their whole life?" Without missing a beat, she grabbed her cup and casually spilled the drink right onto his face. He stared at her, stunned. "What is this right now?" he barked, wiping his face. Jane calmly reached into her bag, pulled out a sachet of stew, and poured it into the empty cup. "Welcome to Korea," she said with a smirk. "Take it home, measure the water properly, and boil it. There's also kimchi stew here. Lots of it." She placed the cup back on the table, picked up her gift bag, and gave him a cool glance. "Thanks for the drink. I'll drink it well," she said, turning on her heel and walking away. He screamed, "Hey, Hong Jane!" She paused, then slowly turned around to face him, a slight smirk on her lips. With a playful tone, she asked, "Ha, Junseop, why are you treating me so badly? There must be a reason, right? It's not because I ignored you when you begged me to meet just once, is it?" He remained silent, and she tilted her head as if mulling it over. "No, right? That wouldn't be it. But could it be? I'm even suffocating in my sleep, you know?" She stood there, waiting, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before she began to walk away again. She thought to herself, if you hadn't touched me first, this wouldn't be happening. As she walked toward the elevator, she sighed inwardly. Ugh, did I drink too much? She tried to steady herself, thinking, just hold on a little longer and walk normally until we get down. Her hand fumbled through her bag as she muttered, the card. Just as she found it, the elevator doors opened. Inside stood a gentleman, and she couldn't help but think, it feels like winter in here. Changjo asked what she was looking for, and Jane fumbled through her bag, searching for the card. She mentioned they needed it to go down, but he pointed out that it wasn't necessary. She thought to herself that it was only needed for going up. He asked if she was going home, and she wondered, were they even acquaintances? He motioned for her to get in, and she hesitated, recalling that he had been about to enter earlier. He shrugged it off, saying it didn't matter. She hesitated, not sure how to respond, but thought to herself that he smelled nice, like roses or maybe lilies. It was the scent of a fully bloomed flower, layered with a faint trace of cigarette smoke. The smell wasn't sweet or soft, but still intriguing. Curious, she asked him about the fragrance, wondering if he could tell her the name. He didn't respond right away, instead asking if she was getting off. She pressed him again, asking for the name, but he shrugged and replied that, unfortunately, he didn't know at the moment. She raised an eyebrow, still puzzled by his response. He explained that the perfume was a gift he had received, adding that he'd check the name for her next time. She playfully asked how he could be so sure they'd meet again before walking away. As she stepped outside, the snow caught her attention, and she turned back, curiosity piqued. Her question about the perfume's origin had been answered with an unexpected admission. It was a gift from someone he'd dated. She couldn't hide her surprise. The idea of him having been in a relationship seemed almost absurd to her. He seemed unfazed, as if it was no big deal, though her reaction clearly caught him off guard. Her disbelief lingered, but he only shrugged, as if to say, "Why wouldn't I have dated someone?" She asked if he had his driver waiting for him. He replied that he didn't have anything like that. She offered to give him a ride, mentioning that her car would be arriving soon. Then, with a playful tone, she said, "Do you know that they say when the first snow falls, love will come?" She looked at him, waiting for a reaction. He raised an eyebrow and she quickly added, "What? Why are you looking at me like I'm pathetic?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "No reason. I just thought it was funny seeing you stand there under a closed ceiling like that." She cleared her throat, mentioning her car should be arriving soon. He suggested she wait inside while he left, but she stopped him, insisting she'd give him a ride. He declined, explaining he didn't like being uncomfortable. She then asked if he could stay with her until her car arrived, feeling uneasy waiting alone since she wasn't fully sober. He agreed to stay and then asked if the car would be arriving soon. She reassured him it would, as she'd called for it before coming out. As they waited, she wondered aloud if they had met before. She studied his face with a tilt of her head, wondering aloud if they'd met before. He shut it down without hesitation, apparently not even once. Still, she pressed a little, playful but half serious. Would they run into each other again? He met her gaze, and she reminded him of the promise to share his perfume's name next time. That meant there had to be a next time. He raised an eyebrow, amused, and asked if she actually wanted to see him again. She shrugged with a smirk, pretending to play it cool. Sort of. Maybe. Not that much. Just a little. He nodded toward the approaching headlights, pointing out her car. She confirmed it with a glance and fished out her phone, holding it out to him with a grin. Might as well swap numbers, just in case fate wasn't feeling generous next time. But instead of taking the phone, he strolled right past her and toward the car, cool as ever. He agreed it would be tough to meet again by accident, casually brushing off the moment like it didn't weigh more than it should. She blinked in disbelief, watching him. That was it? He was really just going to let her go with a vague maybe? Then he opened the door for her, surprisingly gentlemanly, and with a quiet calm, promised that next time he'd tell her everything. Not by chance, she slid into the seat, still not sure what just happened. The door shut behind her with a solid bang, sealing the moment. And just like that, the car pulled away, leaving only the echo of what-ifs behind. He stepped into the convenience store, swiping a few things off the shelves and heading to the counter. The cashier rang everything up and politely asked him to insert his card. His gaze landed on the lonely lollipop in front of him, only 2 left, and somehow that felt a bit tragic. He commented on it, half to himself. The cashier offered to check the stock, already reaching for the scanner. He gave a nod, and she asked him to wait a moment, disappearing with the efficiency of someone who could probably navigate that store blindfolded. His phone lit up with a call. Cultural Department, Jong Ji-young. He answered casually, greeting the caller. Ji-young's voice came through, rapid and curious, asking where he was and if he'd met Jane. Before he could answer, the cashier returned, trying to speak, but he cut her off with a polite murmur, grabbed the 2 remaining lollipops like they were precious loot, and made his way out without waiting for a full report. Ji-young sounded smug on the other end, clearly proud that his tip had been spot on. He'd insisted earlier that Jane would be there, and now he was fishing for credit. He admitted it. Ji-young wasn't totally useless after all. With that victory claimed, Ji-young moved on to what really mattered, ribs. He demanded a meal, then launched into questions, too curious for his own good. Getting into that place wasn't easy, especially without a VIP card. He wanted to know how the doors had opened. Was there still some kind of connection? Hadn't that all been burned down already? He recalled the card. It had originally been his. More accurately, it was something his father had handed over, probably expecting him to make use of it like the others. But he'd never been the type to enjoy gathering for drinks or dabbling in the usual VIP vices. Casual sex outside the house wasn't exactly his idea of fun either. When he first received it, he honestly doubted he'd ever find a reason to use it. Turned out, His initial worry had been unnecessary. The penthouse suite at the Elton Hostel, strictly reservation only and accessible only with an executive VIP card that required actual credentials, ended up serving a surprisingly practical purpose. Instead of wild parties or luxury escapades, he used it for interviews. Even sources who had flat out refused to talk would suddenly change their tune the moment they heard where the meeting would be. Noble politicians, after all, had a soft spot for red carpets and premium liquor. Being pampered made them feel important, and that always loosened a tongue or two. He told the person on the other end that he'd wrapped things up earlier. If anything went sideways, he'd probably end up frozen stiff, so he asked for a padded jacket to be ready. Jung Ji-young laughed and asked how long it would take. He estimated about an hour. Ji-young promised to wait with the manuscript and jacket in hand, cheerfully calling him Reporter Yoon like he was announcing a national hero. With that, the call ended, and the cold outside suddenly felt a little less dramatic. Yoon thought to himself about Hong Jane, the woman who would likely be living with him from now on, unless, of course, something unexpected came up. Fortunately, there was someone around to keep her quiet, so he had planned to assess things from a safe distance. Getting up close and personal like this definitely wasn't part of the plan, but then again, there were always variables. The woman he'd encountered seemed more vulnerable than he had anticipated. She was stumbling, drunk, and clearly exhausted, yet still trying to get into a car with a man she'd never met before. Yoon remembered when she had wailed, "I'm still not sober, and I'm a bit scared to wait alone." He thought to himself that her naivety was almost shocking. She was revealing everything without a plan. It seemed the secret love child scandal involving Hong Jane, the chairman of Daham Group, which had caused a stir about 20 years ago, was even more complicated to handle than he had anticipated. He sighed to himself. "I guess I'll have to teach the princess how to use proper honorifics first." He tossed his cigarettes aside, popped the lollipop into his mouth, and muttered, "Shall we go then?" Jane couldn't shake the thought from her mind. "He said he'd see me again soon." She frowned, feeling a little confused. Who is he, though? Her mind worked through the details. If I remember correctly, the man came up to the room alone, and then, after meeting me, he immediately went back down with me. She tried to make sense of it. If it was Park Jin-seop, there'd be no reason for him to leave so quickly. Why would he? A puzzled thought crossed her mind. Should I ask why he came up? Or maybe he just wanted to take a stroll around the place? She wasn't sure, but she definitely felt like she was missing something. The lady looked at Jane, a slight frown on her face. "Vice Director, please don't shake your legs. It's a sign of bad luck." Jane paused and glanced down at her legs, a bit confused. "Ah, I'm not shaking my legs," she replied, a little defensive. "Why do you keep bringing this up? I told you, it's just a passing connection." The lady didn't look convinced. "That's not the feeling I'm getting. He said he was just saying empty words to charm you. He's definitely a flirt." Jane shook her head. Rather than empty words, he definitely wasn't a flirt. She sighed, wondering how she always ended up in these kinds of misunderstandings. The lady looked at Jane with a mix of concern and disbelief. She pointed out that the man had told Jane to go inside and wait because it was cold, and had promised to stay by her side. Jane quickly tried to explain, but the lady wasn't done. With a wistful expression, she recalled how the man had said he'd see Jane again before leaving. Jane felt a little awkward, but insisted it hadn't been that dramatic. The lady, however, wasn't convinced. She believed the man was more than just friendly, calling him a flirt, and not just any flirt, but one with a particular style. She pointed out that this had been going on for days. Jane, clearly uncomfortable, just wanted to move past the topic. The lady pushed her further, handing her something to look at, insisting she check it out first. Jane, still feeling defensive, tried to clarify, "I don't mean anything by it. I'm just curious, okay?" She hoped the situation would settle, but it was clear the lady wasn't going to drop it anytime soon. The lady gave Jane a stern look and handed over the resume of the new security guard who would be joining soon. She explained that she had narrowed it down to the final 3 candidates. Curious, Jane asked about team leader Kang, noting how strange it was that he had no contact or greeting for anyone. The lady explained that he must be doing well, and that was why there was no need for communication. Jane couldn't help but think it was thoughtless. But the more she thought about it, the stranger it seemed. She realized she didn't even know Team Leader Kang's name or age, and that struck her as odd. She wondered how it was possible to work so closely with someone and still know so little about them. He had packed up and left before completing his one-year contract, citing personal reasons, though Jane didn't know the specifics. Before Team Leader Kang, there had been Team Leader Lee, and before him, Team Leader Song. Sometimes they were female, sometimes male. It felt like the same cycle repeated every year, and yet, Jane had never bothered to get any of their contact information. Jane couldn't help but feel frustrated. But can't we stop doing this now? She muttered. Let's just hire someone for a simple 9-to-6 shift. It seemed like a more practical solution, though she knew it would probably get tangled up in the same old routine. The lady shook her head. Jane had suggested coming to her house as an alternative, but the lady wasn't having it. She made it clear that constant doorbell ringing was unacceptable, especially when Jane was alone. Jane, though, wasn't backing down easily and teased about coming over instead, only to be met with the lady's icy response. Trying to move things along, the lady got back to business, suggesting Jane review the resumes quickly as the interviews were about to start. Jane, with a playful sigh, commented on the lady's cold demeanor, but it didn't faze her. As they went through the resumes, the lady paused on the last one. She seemed to find something of interest, her finger resting on the name Yoon. Jane glanced at the resume, her thoughts racing. That name, it couldn't be. The man who had completely caught her off guard before, who talked about coincidences and then disappeared just as suddenly. The bodyguard. She frowned, trying to focus on the details in front of her. Curious, Jane asked about the person at the end of the list, but the lady wasn't having it. She stiffened, her tone firm as she reminded Jane of the boundaries she had set when it came to personal information. With a sharp look, the lady added, "Employees and employers don't mix privately." She was clearly sticking to her principles, a policy she had implemented after some incident a few years ago. The mention of it made Jane's mind drift briefly back to that time. She remembered, but she wasn't ready to dig into the past just yet. Jane blinked, caught off guard. "Huh?" she muttered, trying to regain her composure. The lady didn't miss a beat, her tone sharp as she asked why Jane was so curious about the man's background. Jane hesitated, realizing that if she revealed the man from the hotel was the same one listed here, he would likely be dismissed before even stepping into the interview. She quickly masked her curiosity. "No, it's just that his background is so unusual. I couldn't help but be curious." The lady raised an eyebrow. "That's a bit much, isn't it? I saw that background and was surprised too." Trying to change the subject, Jane asked, "So, prosody. What time is he scheduled to arrive?" 10 a.m., the lady replied. Jane glanced at the clock. "What time is it now?" The lady gave her a deadpan look. "Do you wear your watch just for show?" "It's 8:23. Jane thought to herself, "So we have to wait for almost an hour and a half. Great, guess I'll just kill time until he arrives." She sighed quietly, settling in for the wait. There was a knock on the door. The lady entered, announcing the arrival of the applicant for the 10 o'clock interview. Jane nodded, signaling for the person to come in. Cheongjo was offered a seat and asked about his drink preference. He requested something other than coffee, so tea was brought. The lady then turned to Jane, asking if she needed anything. Jane, a bit surprised, pouted at the thought of having a drink herself. Thanks for tuning in. If you're hooked and want more, please comment and subscribe. Your comments and subscriptions fuel my motivation to continue. I'll see you in the next part.